and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
It's Monday night at 9 p.m. and time for Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers. Dr. Ricky Siegel is a certified sex therapist, educator, and supervisor, and his brother Larry Siegel is a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator. The Siegel brothers are here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality, but we're unsure who to ask, including questions you didn't even know you had. They will also welcome guests from around the globe to talk about a wide variety of topics and issues within the fascinating world of sexuality. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Sex Talk.
Good afternoon. It's good evening. So it's afternoon somewhere. It's Monday evening on the East Coast of the USA, so that means it's time for Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers. I am Ricky Siegel, certified sex therapist.
And I am Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator.
And my big bro.
Yes, proudly so.
And very happy to be here again talking with you about our favorite subject. Sex and sexuality. Which we get paid to talk about, which is a rather extraordinary thing. Sexuality educators, sexuality counselors working in areas of sexual medicine, and of course sexuality educators there just simply are not enough of in the world, and maybe someday soon the United States will join the rest of the civilized world in the 21st century and have comprehensive sexuality education in the schools instead of the fiasco and the mess that we have now.
Well, doesn't it seem to be one of life's great ironies that where it's needed the most is the greatest resistance?
Of course. So we have little to no good, comprehensive, consistent sex ed. And then, of course, everywhere you go throughout the country, all of these culture wars rage. So-called red state, blue state stuff, which most of us is nonsense. But, of course, as we know, these things affect sexual attitudes and sexual values, and when people have unhealthy sexual attitudes and sexual values, they often have sexual problems in their relationships.
It's almost a given.
You know, it's funny, when I first got into sex ed, inheriting your old Planned Parenthood job 25, almost 26 years ago. 27.
I'm going on 30, so yeah.
I was naive enough to think that only more liberal, left-leaning people welcomed sex ed, and right-wing or right-leaning, more conservative, especially religious people, you know, well, I guess it stood most of the time true, oppose sex ed, but oppose sex and sexuality in general. You and I, over the years, have had wonderful experiences with clergy of all stripe, rabbis and priests and ministers and even imams that have welcomed our work and welcomed us and recognized that spirituality and sexuality are entwined as much as Freud coined the term psychosexual development. We have spiritual,
we know that, you know, the social, the emotional, the psychological, the sexual, the spiritual, these are all kind of components of our well-being, of our humanity. And I think, you know, what you're also talking about, one of the great lessons I think that we've also got to learn is that, you know, when you're talking about religion, particularly when it comes to sex and sexuality, no religion's monolithic. There is a range and there's a diversity. You know, when people basically say, well, you know, I'm Catholic, so you know how I think. I said, no, I don't.
Right, of course.
I know a lot of Catholics who do not think that way.
There's millions of pro-choice Catholics. And
that's right.
Of course, well, every religion, though, you can go from the more permissive ends to the Orthodoxy. And I think anytime you're in Orthodoxy, regardless of what faith, you tend to see more repressive views on sexuality, more sex negativity, more pleasure phobia.
Right, and that's really kind of the culture war that most religions and even, I think, you know, societally is really what's going on. It's really more about a progressive versus an orthodox view.
Right.
Of whatever the belief system is.
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing it politically. We're seeing it socially. We're seeing it with this asinine value statements that are being made by this president of ours and his supporters. So, I mean, that's really the big split. Are we evolving? Are we progressive? Do we see, the wide range of humanity?
We're going backwards.
Right. And that's the
we're regressing in
back
the most,
into orthodoxy.
Yeah, in the most unhealthy ways, so that this new wave of sex negativity is like we were talking about last week. 30 years of trying to do this work, we really haven't pushed the needle all that much culturally. However, through our professional circles, professional organizations, and training and supervising other sex therapists, as I said, we've had some wonderful opportunities in the old sex ed days. We've also had some great opportunities in recent years training sex therapists in stumbling upon a group of therapists so brave and so bold and going up such a generally giant and monolithic organization as the Mormon Church.
Yeah.
Braxton, are you on the line? We are pleased to have with us this evening Braxton Dotson from Salt Lake City. Braxton, how are you, man?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Really good to
Nice
see
to hear
you. Good to
you.
have you. We were talking about
there you
the
are.
incredible honor we had getting to work with first Natasha and the Christians and then the rest of the Mormon Mental Health Association. You guys were kind enough to bring us out for a couple trainings. We went to,
Salt Lake and Kansas City.
the Little
Actually,
Apple,
Lawrence, Kansas.
The Little Apple, Lawrence, Kansas.
Yeah.
And Salt Lake City was beautiful. Got the rock star treatment and did some great trainings. And I believe that's how we met in person the first time. Is that right?
Yeah, that was our first go.
Yep.
That was the first time we met up. That was a wonderful training to have.
Thank
Loved
you
having
so
there.
much. So what I was leading up to with this little chit-chat, waiting for to introduce you, is something that I know you know a great deal about, and I hope that we can talk about tonight. And that is that while our sexuality education doesn't progress and the values and culture wars continue, what does continue to be a problem within families and within relationships is religious guilt.
Oh, yeah.
I know the textbook I have coming out in August, The Art of Sex Therapy Supervision, we have a chapter by a therapist I'm sure you know, Tina Sellers, who's written a book on Christian shame. And, folks like you and the Mormon Mental Health Association, as I said, are truly going up against some giant institutions.
Yeah.
Why don't you just tell our listeners whatever it is, you know.
What you guys were talking about earlier with the Orthodox and permissive, that spectrum is so real, especially as I talk to the majority of my clients that come and see me are somewhere along that spectrum in Mormonism or in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. What I find, and it's fascinating because the number one question I get when people come into my office are like, "Are you Mormon?" And just as Larry said, okay, Mormon what? I end up letting them know, like, I'm very familiar with the Mormon practices. We can talk about religious parts. We can not talk about it. Whatever you'd like to experience, I'm here to help you with. But tell me what Mormonism means to you, because someone's Mormon that another person might classify as Jack Mormon, or someone that's that is more permissive in the faith than they are Orthodox. And we talk about that exact spectrum. Are you more Orthodox? If you're not, and we start talking about masturbation, I talk about this scale quite frequently when we're talking about Orthodox Judaism, Mormonism, all the way to Jehovah's Witness. We are seeing a lot more shame that's involved with it, because you're told the authority of the person or the authority of your sexuality has been based on an LDS belief, or in this situation, LDS belief, but more on what the Bible has said, or someone else has been your authority. And we start to work on what are you going to do to reclaim your authority and make your sexuality yours.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's I'm going to say not an easy thing, I think, for particularly LDS members to even, I think, ponder, because it seems to be kind of the opposite of what I think in most religions, but especially in the LDS Church, what their doctrine is really about. because it is about accepting that authority. When we look at the masculinity, which I definitely want to pick your mind about, masculinity in among LDS members, it seems to be filled with so many kind of just conflicts and contradictions that I think even just asking somebody who considers themselves kind of a devout or loyal member of the church, how they define it for themselves, that's got to throw them off right from the very beginning.
It's very difficult for a lot of individuals, because when I ask that, then the main answer I get is, well, it's don't have sex before you're married, don't masturbate, don't arouse any type of sexual feelings before marriage, and then once you are married, keep it within the bounds of marriage. That is what's been given. They have a pamphlet called The For Strength of Youth, which is for the 12 to 18-year-old individuals that cover what you're supposed to do, from grooming to sexuality to scripture study. It defines what you're supposed to do. So when we break that down, we talk about values, and it's hard to start into what are your values and what do you hold most dear, not necessarily given to you by church officials. Which is, we're talking about masculinity. The church is run by male cisgender individuals, or those that identify as male cisgender, and that is the leadership from all the way down to what's called a ward or a local congregation to the prophet who's running the entire church.
Wow.
So
but of course, from top to bottom, few are trained in sexuality, or even have often a sex-positive view or any kind of real experience to draw from. And if I remember correctly, it's a lay clergy. Is that right? There isn't really a seminary. And
right. Yeah. And from to just add to that too, my understanding is that when a boy turns 12, he now has more authority than his mother. He can now give communion. He can now, be like a church leader. At 16, I think they can perform baptisms. And but this is just by virtue of being a male, is it? So my understanding is that not only very much part of the church, but when they reach age 12 or so, they're kind of ordained in this sort of lay priesthood.
Part of the Aaronic priesthood, and then you move up through the different years, 12 to 14, and 14 gets more. You become what's called a teacher, and then so you go from deacon to teacher to then priest, and then you can do the baptisms, and then you're also able to go on a mission, which is essentially 2 years of missionary work, teaching people about the beliefs of Christ and in the LDS Church, as well as once you get to a place of, is what you said with the 12-year-old having more authority over his mom. It kind of depends on, he's got the priesthood. However, they do talk about mothers have their place in the home, in the sense of they have their run over the family. The father has his authority over the family, but then there's also that 12-year-old does have a priesthood that the mother does not have, and that's where that power differential does begin, and it starts from that age moving on.
So women are expected to be subservient, I would imagine.
Oh yeah,
but I'm really curious to ask you, Braxton. Right, you being out there in Salt Lake City, how are values changing among young Mormons? I got to imagine Dan Reynolds' documentary and Imagine Dragon are like the Beatles out there, right? Have you seen the kind of cultural impact and any real overt change yet?
So what I'm seeing, the interesting part of all this, and I wish I had the actual reference to it, but there's been talk about how there's roughly 60% of millennials aren't staying Orthodox. Now, whatever Orthodox means, they're not staying directly 100% true to the teachings of the church. That could vary, I'm sure. However, there's a lot of individuals that identify with their friends being LGBTQ+, that they're not seeing the big deal in not drinking coffee or whatever it may be. They start to question these values, and there's a lot of upheaval with that. But what I find, and what I find interesting, is that you've got on one side these individuals that are saying, hey, you know what, we're going to take some of it and not, and I enjoy this part and this part, and I'm going to keep it up to my standards of what I would like with my values. And then you've got on the other side the individuals that are even going more and more orthodox with this is the end of times, these are the signs that people are going to start saying, hey, this is okay, this is not okay, so I'm going to make sure that I go completely orthodox. I'm going to live this 100%, and there's becoming more of a separation. That's the pattern that I'm noticing.
Yeah, what do they call those? Not menu Mormons. There's some kind of term.
Cafeteria Mormons.
The like choosing a la carte kind of thing. Just picking and choosing.
I think people do that with a lot of religion.
Absolutely. And again, I think we are seeing more and more within the LDS Church. How Braxton? How do you work, especially with young men, in reconciling these contradictions of masculinity? Because isn't it even sort of part of church doctrine that I guess what's referred to as natural man versus Mormon man? The natural man that hasn't learned the teachings, prone to anger and I think promiscuity and all this kind of stuff, versus the Mormon man, which shows loving restraint and is very emotional. But there's this underlying dichotomy that sex basically is a privilege, yet a danger at the same time. It's something to be celebrated, yet repressed. It's something to be revered and feared.
Yeah.
Going on the mission and, the partnership that's involved in that, and you can't leave each other's side. There's a lot of that homoerotic, I've heard the term homosocial tension. So again, there's a lot of this sort of feeling, repression, dynamic that seems to be part of growing up as a Mormon male. So how do you help young men navigate those waters?
With that simple question.
When you're saying the natural man, so the scripture that goes along with that is the natural man is an enemy to God and has been since the fall of Adam. So it's referring to all men. And we're talking humankind. It's essentially the carnal desires, if we're going to name it something, the carnal desires that the body has, and how can you demonstrate power over that. So fasting once a month. We fast once a month so that you can become more spiritual, again, overcome these carnal desires. Same with sex, masturbation. The natural man is going to have sex as much as it can, and you're trying not to, which kind of moves into the degenerative theory, which is if any man is left by himself, then he's going to continually march down this path until they're just this monster, which is what I get the most of the time. It's like, I don't want to masturbate, because if I masturbate, I'm going to move into watching pornography of some form, and then if I watch pornography of some form, it's going to go hardcore, and if I watch hardcore porn, it's not going to be enough, so then I'm going to look at child porn, or I'm going to rape somebody. That's the natural man, and that's this degenerative theory that a lot of individuals subscribe to. So giving some psychosocial education, psychoeducation, I guess you will, is one of the ways that I go about that, letting them know about the degenerative theory, and that it's not a solid truth. And when they pull out Ted Bundy, we talk about how Ted Bundy was a psychopath and not a run-of-the-mill person. He was dealing with some really big issues. And the main thing that I try and work with, especially working with men, these males that come in and see me, is identifying where. So an Orthodox individual, someone that comes in, I want to build these bridges with what they have in religion, because religion is not necessarily, I don't want it to be this enemy to healthy sex. I want to be able to build this bridge.
Excellent. Yes.
So how can we bring in God in your relationship instead of having it be told to you on what is correct and what is not correct. So when we talk about it, I give them, essentially put on my LDS hat, my Mormon hat, and say, okay, this is what I know about teachings, this is what we've talked about, this is what we learned since we were in primary, since we were young kids. Now, here's the research that we know. So what do we want to do with this information, and what would you think about asking God? What would you think about researching on this? How does this feel to you? We do a lot of body awareness, spiritual awareness, emotional, mental awareness, so that they get to start asking these difficult questions, and instead of ending the conversation at, well, the pamphlet says this, we drive it into what is the function of the natural man?
Excellent.
To reproduce and to have pleasure and to have fun. How can we own that, as well as not push women down while we're doing that? And how can we have respectful sexual relationships? How can you respect yourself? What does that look like? And have difficult conversations when someone says that they want to stop doing something that brings them a lot of shame. And how do we have a shame talk about owning what your body is and what you would like your goals to look like?
Well said.
Yeah, very
nice. And I have to think that your training as a social worker and a sex therapist enables you to go back to that frame, right? When I was first licensed in Florida, counselor wasn't a licensed protected term, only therapist was. So Christian counselors who worked in the church had this kind of, I don't need to get a master's degree and a license because I work in the church. So the process you just described would kind of end with the brochure. Well, this is what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And, we know that's not really client-centered therapy.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think you're like helping people make what I consider a very important shift, although it may be a threat to the institution. But I think helping people gain this sense of individual agency over their life, particularly their sexuality, and not deferring so absolutely to the authority of the church. Acknowledging that there is that authority, it is there, but the fact that I think you're asking people to bring it home a little bit, bring it into their heart and sort of understand it from that perspective, I think that's a major shift, both within the LDS population and I think just church populations in general. So hats off to you.
It's owning their sexuality, but also if someone decides that the values of the church is in line with them, great, let's look at it. But let's be intentional with what's going on versus just following what we've been told for years and years. Then we can identify where the shame's coming from or where you'd like to go with your sexuality. And we can do a lot more with an intentional sexuality than we can with, I've been told to do this, so I'm going to continue on.
Mm-hmm.
The great part about the lay clergy, and what my main goal is, what I enjoy working with bishops, are called bishops, is they're the front lines. In all honesty, when we're talking Orthodox or even in between, from permissive all the way to Orthodox, the majority of people that are talking about sex are talking about sex to their bishops because they're the trusted neighbor that has the authority to work with them. And so we've got these bishops that might be a mechanic, or maybe a therapist, or maybe a dentist that is working with these individuals. And when a relationship comes up and there's been an infidelity, or pornography shows up in a relationship, or a 15-year-old kid is in the office saying, I don't know how to stop looking at pornography, I feel out of control, having that relationship with those bishops is critical.
Right.
Because without talking with them, if they sit there and feel as though, okay, I haven't had much training on this, I'm going to go with whatever I feel, there can be some damage there, but also there could be so much good happen at the very beginning where they can say, you know what, let's get you into some support. We know this therapist, we're going to go talk to him.
Nice.
I want to work with you on making this a better thing. We're going to try and stop this pornography use right now. And I'm going to help you in this capacity, but I want to be able to help you by also seeing this therapist for a couple of sessions, and I'm going to help pay for that. There's a lot of good these bishops and stake presidents can do with these kids, but they need to know that there's access, or they have access to correct sexual information.
Excellent. And unfortunately, that's something that's kind of very inconsistent, as we see in a lot of other things as well. But unfortunately, our biggest nemesis is time.
Yeah, this half hour always flies by really quickly, but we want to thank you. Again, our guest has been Braxton Dotson from Salt Lake City, Utah, and I hope our affiliation continues.
Yes, indeed.
And really thank you for your insights, and thanks for the mountain you guys are moving out there.
Yes,
Thank you for having me on. It's been great being with you guys.
Keep it
same
up.
Here. Great to see you.
All the best.
All right. Take care, Braxton.
See ya.
It is it's an ongoing issue. In 2018, people deal with sexual shame as a direct result of religion, regardless of what faith background.
That's right.
And
that's right. Across the board, sex is still the major casualty of religion.
Yeah, yeah. And what do comedians always say? You know, it's if you're having good sex, you're supposed to be calling out his name.
That's right.
If that's not a spiritual experience, right?
Well, you remember
nobody's yelling Steve when they're having an orgasm.
And not for nothing, not to pick on one in particular, but you know, again, there was an invention of sex negativity that did kind of come with the Catholic Church.
Yeah, and all of that rewriting,
very much so.
That rewriting of
people
the Bible.
used to use sex to get closer to God.
Yeah.
Right. So hopefully we can recapture some of this sort of positivity, keep sex passionate, keep it positive, keep it hopeful, keep it
pleasurable, and yes, spiritual even.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
We want to thank you for listening. If you've been with us on the radio in South Florida, or if you're watching live streaming on Facebook, please share and let your friends know about Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers every Monday night at 9 o'clock.
And
this Thursday, we will be joining Becky and Boca right here in this studio, Thursday at 6 o'clock on WWNN. We're at 95.3 FM, 1470 AM, WNN. Thank you. Good night. Until next week.
You've been listening to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us every Monday night at 9 p.m. on WNN, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Or watch live streaming video at AMP2 TV Productions on Facebook, or look for the shows on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next week.
The opinions